Hi, everyone, and welcome to Reason and Rationality's podcast, where we practice critical thinking through convivial conversation. I'm Claire, and today I'm joined by four fellow students from the Reason and Rationality program, plus a very special guest, Joe Schmid, a philosophy PhD student at Princeton University. Today, we're going to tackle the question, would you give up your real life to experience a perfect but fake life? To set some background, philosopher Robert Nozick posed a thought experiment called the experience machine, which can simulate the perfect life full of anything you desire, except none of it is real. If you had the chance to plug into this machine forever and live your perfect life, would you do it?
I'm a little bit hesitant to plug into the experience machine because one thing that I value as a philosopher is actually being connected up with reality. I think knowledge is pretty valuable in and of itself. And even though while in the experience machine, I could have any subjective experiences I want, it seems like it's kind of fake, right? It seems like I'm being systematically deceived while in the experience machine. But I think having that kind of knowledge is deeply important, deeply valuable. I think it contributes to living a good life. And I think it's something that we miss when we're in the experience machine. So I would be at least hesitant to hop into the experience machine for that reason. There are other reasons as well, but that's one reason why I would be hesitant.
So, what I think about this, I think my intuitions align very neatly with yours, Joe, on this issue. That yeah, I do think there's an objective value to truth. I mean, I'm also pretty fond of philosophy. I think it's very important that we try to get at truth. But I would wonder, what we ground this desire for objective truth in, because I might say, well, okay, I think that it's very important for me to have objective truth and have access to objective truth. But doesn't it seem quite possible that I just think this because my experience of learning things is positive for me because it's pleasurable, or maybe it's satisfactory in some way that's maybe a little higher than base pleasure, but is still definitely grounded in my experience. And I think my intuition does really tell me that truth has objective value, but it's really difficult to see from where I can derive that objective value. I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I think, Harry, that you bring up some really good points when it comes to the objectivity of the situation. I think that for us in our human experience, right, we understand the truth that we're getting at through our lived experiences. I think that depending on the certain things that we're able to encounter, the situations that we're able to face, people that we're able to meet, that's going to help determine, I guess, what our perception of truth is. I think those experiences can also help teach you what isn't truth, like what's a lie or what's BS, as we got to have these conversations about in other classes. But I do think that being able to understand that idea of truth plays a big role into the experience machine. And I think from my perspective personally, I'm going to agree with the side of Joe about how I wouldn't plug into the experience machine for the rest of my life. I think also one of the tenets that goes into it is the idea of real human, like genuine human connection. Because once you're in the machine, depending if you have knowledge, if you're actually in that simulation or if you aren't, I think that one of the most beautiful things that we can get out of life is the ability to form meaningful connections over any kind of topic with another individual that's kind of real, wholesome, and genuine. And I feel like once you get plugged into the experience machine and everything almost becomes simulated or artificial, you kind of take that connection and put it off to the side. So I do think that maybe opting out of it would be like the choice if your values align similarly to mine. But I really do like that you brought up truth, Harry. I don't know if anyone wants to jump off that.
So, Annika, you bring up genuine connection and the people that you meet, and that there's beauty and knowing that you're meeting real people who have, genuine intentions with you, but you don't actually know that with the people you meet in real life. Like, you don't know that the friends that you make are truly friends. And as pessimistic as that sounds, maybe people have ulterior motives when they're talking to you, but I feel like that doesn't stop you from believing that it's genuine. The experience machine guarantees that you don't really know that you're in it and you still think it's genuine connection, then what makes that different than what you're really feeling now in your real life?
I think you bring up a really good point, Claire. And I think that the experience machine being able to kind of simulate that perfect life and having the ability to simulate those perfect connections is one of the benefits that you can get out of it. But I also think that living in our world today, whether it's making those connections or not, I think that the other side of it with like failing with those connections, although it may bring a sense of unhappiness or even kind of it takes away some of the pleasure that you'd get from forming those real connections. I think that being able to understand and differentiate between what is a real connection and what isn't through that trial and error process that we get in our world, something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have in the experience machine if we're operating under the situation that you are kind of getting more of the highs and not necessarily all of the kind of struggle and strife that comes with that. If we're operating under the idea that you're kind of choosing your own perfect world and it's not necessarily like just like a semi-boosted normal experience, if that makes sense.
So I think but I think something that Claire might have been getting at also is that we're brushing up a little bit against the hard problem of consciousness here, which is just that, like, I know I exist and I think because I have subjective experience of that, but I don't know that for a fact when it comes to other people. And I think where we run into this here is, okay, we can't actually be 100% sure that the people we interact with in real life are conscious. Like Annika, Joe, I don't know that you guys are real. I have very good reason to believe that you're real, perhaps, but I don't know it for sure. And this brings up the question, well, if we don't know that the relationships we have with people are real in the sense you're talking about them being real, then it seems difficult for us to suppose. And again, I'm very open to the possibility if you can give me a way we can derive this, but it seems really difficult to suppose that it's the actual fact of the relationships and not our experience of the relationships that gives them meaning in our purview.
I was just going to give one possible counterexample to that we talked about in class. So imagine we have a married couple, Samantha and Alex. And Samantha definitely doesn't want Alex to cheat on her. In fact, if she were to find out about that, she'd be very upset. She really wants to be in a committed monogamous relationship with her husband. And, as it happens, she thinks she is. She and Alex, they watch fun Netflix shows together. They, go out every so often. They just do lots of shared activities. And overall, their marriage seems to be extremely happy and rewarding to Samantha. Unbeknownst to her, Alex, every time or twice a week, he takes a little bit longer at work. And he says, he's just working on projects overtime. But what's really happening is that Alex is cheating on her, unbeknownst to her. Now, suppose that Samantha goes to she lives her whole life like this, not knowing that her husband has been cheating on her and does so, let's say, for decades. That's one version of the Samantha-Alex story, okay? Compare that to another version of the Alex-Samantha story, where Alex engages in all the same behaviors around Samantha. So he says the same things, they do the same activities, he expresses the same emotions. And so, in particular, Samantha has all the same subjective experiences in the relationship. She still wants a committed monogamous relationship. She still thinks she's in a committed monogamous relationship. And in fact, she's right about that. And she also, she has all the same subjective experiences in this case. When we compare these two situations, I don't know about you, but it seems to me that the situation in which Samantha is not being cheated on, her life goes better in that situation, even though it's subjectively indistinguishable from her first-person perspective from the situation in which she is, in fact, being cheated on. And if that's the case, well, then subjective experiences alone, like experiences of pain and pleasure and merely believing things, and merely thinking that things are happening when they're not in fact happening, and you're in, let's say, for instance, a simulated reality, that alone is not what determines how well your life goes. There are additional factors. So I mean, that's a challenge to hedonism, something that I think we mentioned earlier, where hedonism is the view that, like, the only things that can affect your well-being are subjective experiences of pain and pleasure. That's not the case, I think. And I think that this additional thought experiment can kind of bring out that intuition. And you can definitely see how it's connected to the experience machine, right? Because in the experience machine, you're not actually connected up with reality. Even though it's unbeknownst to you, I think that does make your life go worse.
So I suppose what I'd say here, Joe, is I think this case appeals to my intuitions very successfully. But the trouble I have with that is I draw a comparison to, like, moral philosophy, normative ethics, which is just like trying to figure out what we should do in the most general sense. And I think what we often do when we're trying to figure out normative ethics is we take a case and we say, okay, what's our intuition about this case? And then we create a theory that describes why our intuition is true. So it is very much the case that my intuitions tell me truth is important, both in the case of the experience machine and the Samantha case. But I suppose where I'm really getting stuck is on a theory that explains those intuitions, like an account of truth and why that should be important to my well-being. And I guess that's what I'm here really looking for. Like, how can I explain? Because I would really love to be able to explain that. I think truth is very important. So how can I explain why I should think truth is important to my well-being?
I was gonna talk about something earlier, talking about when Harry mentioned like not knowing if any of us are real. I feel like as humans, we're shaped by the experiences that we've had, and regardless of whether we any of us are real, like we don't know that for sure. But the fact that all of us have been each other part of each other's lives means that's what makes us human, and that's like it doesn't matter what the truth is. Like if you aren't real, fair enough, but that's those are the experiences we've had, and that's why I feel like yeah, the truth is important, but for us, if we are in a simulation, it doesn't really make sense to leave that because this is all we know. We're different people because we've had different experiences.
So on this view, do you think you would enter the experience machine? What's your take on that?
I don't think I would enter the experience machine because not only as like I'm leaving the people that have built me up behind, I would feel guilty because of that, right? Like not only it's a conscious choice of mine to leave all the people that I know behind in pursuit of like just happiness, right? And I feel like that's a very selfish view.
I think this is a really probative point, and it also illustrates a kind of meta dialectical point that I want to make, which is that oftentimes when philosophers come across these sorts of objections to thought experiments, they will just slightly tweak the thought experiment or slightly modify the thought experiment to get around the problem. So that's actually what philosophers do in the literature when other philosophers in the literature have made this point, Grimhar. And what philosophers have said in response is, okay, let's try to tweak the case, and we can still get a challenge to hedonism, as I was saying earlier. And the tweaked case is, well, just imagine that you're not like abandoning everyone else and foregoing all of your duties to other people by hopping in the experience machine. Suppose that everyone is actually just making the choice to enter their own experience machines, and they'll all be cared for by whatever vat that they're enclosed in and which keeps their essential bodily organs functioning properly. If everyone does that, then you no longer have any obligations to care for others because those are already taken care of. And so that's the way that philosophers at least try to get around that. Now, maybe there are still further objections that one could pose to the use of this thought experiment in motivating the rejection of hedonism, but that's one thing that philosophers say here.
I do want to go back to your point about Samantha and Alex and how there might be more that goes into a good life than just what you're feeling. And I actually want to say that her two situations don't actually change how good of a life she has. Because, okay, if you're not harming other people in the process and you're the only person who the differences in the two situations affect, then if your subjective like reality is exactly the same and nobody else is harmed in the process. Let's say the person that Alex is cheating with is not really a factor and it's not harming her life at all, then I would say that it's the same life that she's living. Because if she doesn't see anything different, then why would her life be any different? Because that's what she's experiencing. And one example that we brought up was, let's say somebody has this passion for counting grass, and that's all they wanted to do. They just wanted to count blades of grass, and for some reason they just loved it. They would go home after work every single day and just count every single blade of grass. And one day they won the lottery, so they were able to quit their job and just count blades of grass for the rest of their life. We argued that to them, if that's a good life and if that fulfills them and that's their passion, just because it doesn't seem like the best life to be living, because it is the best life for them, it is.
Yeah, so I mean, the blades of grass theory, I mean, if I recall in class, I think to this experiment we had like, some people had some different ideas and different intuitions about whether this is a better life than if this person, doesn't miss out on all these other things. Um, but I'm quite interested. What's interesting well, I guess I'll just put this to you. Based on the way you've approached these two questions, do you think you would enter the experience machine, Claire?
I actually think I would enter the experience machine. And one reason why I think that is because I often have very realistic dreams that go extremely well. And I have no idea that I'm dreaming. And it's just the perfect dream. It's everything that I could ever want. And it seems realistic too. And if I could choose to have that dream forever, I probably would. And obviously, I wouldn't actually, if I'm going to be asleep and in a coma for the rest of my life and harm the people around me, then I obviously would not make that decision. But given the fact that you're not actually affecting anyone around you and that factor is taken care of, I don't see why I wouldn't want to be in that dream forever. I mean, all I do when I wake up, all I think is, oh my God, I wish I was back in that dream, or I can't wait to dream about that again tonight. And if I'm having those thoughts, then wouldn't it make sense that I could, if I could choose to just live that forever, that I probably would?
If I could pose another question to you, Claire, I'm curious what you think about this. Um, would you rather be the Samantha that's cheated on, or would you rather be the Samantha that's not cheated on?
Actually, I don't think I would really
Okay,
care.
so you would be indifferent. You'd be okay with flipping a
Only
coin and finding yourself in one of those situations.
The only reason why I would want to be the Samantha who's not cheated on is if other people know that I'm being cheated on, because that's just embarrassing. But I guess if I
But
didn't know that, then it wouldn't really matter.
yeah, that's part of the stipulation that like your subjective experiences go along in the same way. I mean, maybe other people do know, they just never tell you. And so it doesn't make any difference to your subjective states of mind.
If it doesn't make a difference, then I genuinely wouldn't have a preference. I
Okay,
mean,
so you would be okay if we flip the coin between the situation in which you're cheated on and the situation in which you're not.
if I'm promised that it makes no difference, then yeah.
No
So
difference to your subjective states. It does make a difference to whether or not your desire for a committed monogamous relationship is satisfied, though. In one case, it's not satisfied. You have a frustrated desire, whereas in the other case, your desire isn't frustrated. And to a lot of people, it seems like that can affect your well-being over and above how it affects like your conscious subjective experiences. I mean, this is fine. It sounds like you're just okay with accepting this implication of your view, and that's interesting. This just highlights that when philosophers disagree, sometimes people will accept a view and accept its implications, whereas other people will be like, those implications are a little bit tough for me to go along with. So maybe I'll reject those implications and then thereby reject the view which has them. And I think you have a consistent approach to the problem.
I think that like an interesting point to bring up actually that Claire was mentioning in class, but I just want to talk about a little bit here as well, is the idea of what the desire is at its root. So if your desire, let's say that you want a healthy, committed, monogamous relationship, and that's the desire that you're putting out, I guess, into the world, and if that is truly as well what the underlying desire is, then in that situation, the indifference is valid. But I think that when we say that we want a healthy, committed, monogamous relationship, that also comes with a stipulation of being aware if the other person is cheating. So saying that but really the desire I think that we're discussing is saying that I want a healthy monogamous relationship and be aware if the other person is doing something to kind of break that initial desire. So I think that the fundamental, I guess, nature of the desire could be different that we're considering because we're not necessarily talking about the other kind of components that come with it, in a sense, if that makes sense.
So, Annika, it seems like what you're positing is that maybe we can say, as an alternative to pleasure as the root of well-being, maybe we can say that fulfillment of desires is at the root of well-being, which to me, this is more attractive than the idea that pleasure is. But I wonder how you'd respond to this case, which came up in our class. I'm not sure if something similar came up in yours, which would be, okay, let's imagine we had a severely depressed person who has no desires whatsoever. Like this is a person who's just in such dire straits that they just really don't want for anything. It seems like if we're going with this idea of desire, like satisfaction of desires being key to happiness and frustration of desires or not happiness, well-being. I'll be clear on those terms. Satisfaction of desires being key to well-being and frustration of desires being, against well-being. It seems like this person who has no desires at all, who is severely, severely depressed, it seems like this person is in a very neutral state. It doesn't seem like they have. It doesn't seem like they have, marks against their well-being or for their well-being. So I wonder how you'd respond to this case, because I think our intuitions tell us that this person is actually not in a neutral state. This person's in a pretty negative state.
Yeah, I think that I would agree in the sense, Harry, and thank you for positing this. This is actually a very interesting kind of thought experiment to go with it. I think that in the sense of an extremely depressed person who's kind of facing these issues, I think that they are in a negative state, but I also think that it's very close to impossible for the human condition to have no desires at all. I think maybe this is a subjective experience, but if I was placed in that state where I have no desire or will to do kind of menial or surface level things, such as get up and eat or drink water, I think deep down I would still have the desire to want to get out of that negative state and achieve kind of a state of well-being. I think that that desire itself could promote maybe like the actions of wanting to better yourself in that sense. So I think that there isn't really a state where anyone could have no desire. I think that no matter what stage we are in our lives or what we're thinking, there's always some kind of desire, some kind of want that every human intrinsically has, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and to build off of that, I feel like when people do articulate their desires, a lot of times they don't really capture the entire desire. So, Harry, you said that decision or desire theory is more appealing to you, but let's say you desire a really healthy, amazing friend group, right? And you get that, but they live across the world and you can never see them ever again. You got your desire, but that doesn't really give you pleasure because you're not going to see them ever again. So, I feel like you're not really I don't see how that's more appealing than the pleasure of having a friend group, which is more kind of on the hedonism side. And so, like, if you can experience that in the experience machine, even though they're not real, I think I would rather have that than to get my desire fulfilled if it's not the full desire that I want.
So there is a stipulation I could make to this that this is kind of what I'm currently favoring for how to get to well-being, which is that the desires we should take into account are not the desires that I actually have, but the desires that I would have if I were in a rational state of mind given complete information. So this accounts for cases like Stockholm syndrome, where a person might have like, a desire to be close with someone who's kidnapped them, even though this is a very irrational desire. And I think it also, in a sense, accounts for what you're saying about the case of the friend group, because if I had complete information and I was in a rational state of mind, that complete information would also entail complete information of like what it is I'm actually desiring, and I would be able to articulate my desire in such a way that I would say I desire to have a close, intellectually virtuous friend group with which I can actually have interesting conversations on a regular basis. So I think this stipulation does solve at least a lot of problems that desire satisfaction theory runs up against.
We've explored different theories of well-being, and we've also explored how the experience machine, as well as other thought experiments, might support or might be evidence against these theories of well-being. We didn't reach a final resolution, but we did at least increase our understanding of the issues, and that itself is a victory.
And it looks like we have different points, right? Like some of us value truth over pleasure, and then some of us think that, truth is not the most important thing if you don't really know about it. And I feel like even though there's no one answer, which philosophers argue about this all the time, it does deepen our understanding of pleasure versus truth, or even reality versus, delusion. But I think it's interesting to think about. And so with that said, thank you guys for joining. Tune in for the next episode. And if you're interested in more in what we do, you can find out more about Reason Rationality at reasonandrationality.com, which is a pre-college program for high school students. So thank you so much.